In today's video, we'll be taking a look at Ample Sound's vintage Cherry virtual guitar, and I have 3 full licenses to give away to you guys. But first of all, I've got to hit this invisible snare drum. Hi folks, I'm Mike and I hope you're well. Now I'm back in black and it's never been more appropriate. In addition to that, I get to use my red lighting in the background, and I've got the excuse because in today's video I'm going to be taking a look at Ample Sound's new vintage Cherry virtual electric guitar. I'm going to be looking at the sounds and features of this guitar, and as well as that I have 3 full licenses to give away to you guys. So stick around to the end of the video to find out how you can get your name in the draw for one of those licenses. Now before we do get stuck in, I want to say up front, Ample Sound have sent me a copy of this plugin to try out, but I haven't been required to say anything in particular. I'm not being paid for this video, and this video has not been viewed by anyone else before release. In other words, these are my true opinions. Now let's get stuck in and see how this sounds. Now, as regulars to this channel will know, whenever I'm trying out a new virtual instrument, I like to play it in the context of an actual piece of music alongside other instruments, because we rarely listen to these instruments in isolation. So I've done that again for you today. I spent a little bit of time yesterday putting together around about 40 seconds of music so that we can hear this in context, and that's the first thing that we're going to listen to before we delve into the various features of this plugin. Now, a little bit of context for this demo. This vintage Cherry guitar is based upon the Gibson SG guitar. Now that was introduced by Gibson in 1961, and not everyone knows this, but it wasn't originally known as the SG. It was originally released under the Les Paul lineup. It was in 1963 that it was rebadged to the SG. Now it's been played by some pretty famous players, including Eric Clapton, Pete Townshend from The Who, but probably none more famous with this particular guitar than Angus Young from AC/DC. So there's a heritage of rock blues with this guitar, and that is what has informed the little demo that I've put together for you, which I'm going to play now. Now normally I'd ask you guys to name this piece of music down in the comments, because I usually don't have a name for it, and you can do that, but I've actually come up with a little name for this one myself, and it's called 40 Seconds of Cliche. So let's start off by looking at the main features and interface of this guitar. Now, if you've used Ample Sound products at all before, then lots of this won't be new to you. Indeed, it's one of the things I really like about their range of products is that once you've learned one instrument, then the interface is very similar across the rest of the range. So when you get hold of another instrument, you don't have to do a whole lot of learning again. So looking at this main interface, of course, the dominant feature of it is the guitar itself here, and then the keyboard down at the bottom. And just so you know, you can actually change the look of this keyboard quite easily. Now I'm going to go to the settings and do that. They're off screen at the moment, so you can't actually see them, but you can see that you've got the keyboard keys that we start off with here. Then there's also the flat keys, which look a little bit closer to a regular keyboard, and then there's the control keys, which look like a piano keyboard. And I have to say, this is still my favorite look. I just find this a little bit clearer to look at. Maybe that's just me, but there you have it. So if I play something on my keyboard, you'll see it being played on the keys here, and that center part, by the way, that's the core, the main sound out of the box with this guitar. Now that center part there is where you can see the notes being played, but if you look at the lower part of the keyboard, or I should say the left side of the keyboard, the lower notes, you'll see some of them are highlighted with sort of blue colors, and at the top end of the keyboard on the higher notes you'll see some are green, some are blue. These are key switches. These are ways that you can change the sound of this guitar, and you can change that in lots of ways, mainly by changing the sort of articulation articulations. These are ways which a real guitarist uses to express with the instrument, and there's lots more expression, I'm afraid to say, than you'll normally hear on something, a keyboard instrument like a piano. There's slides and there's bends and all kinds of stuff. So that's our main tool for changing the way the player changes the sound. So if I just play that little power chord again, okay, and that's with the sustain sound, which I get by pressing this low C here. If I press D, the low D on the keyboard, we change to the mute sound. If I play that a little bit harder, you'll see it starts to sustain. I actually have to play it pretty hard to do that. So there's all kinds of articulations that a guitarist will use. Some of the things, if you highlight actually on the key here, you can see some of them. So this is a legato slide or a slide in here. If we use that slide in, I'll press that note there and then I'll play a note here. And you can hear those notes being slid in. So that's a really important part of using these instruments to get those different sounds. Another way of getting different sounds is the position that these notes will be played on the guitar neck. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to use one of these key switches to demonstrate. If I press this one here, this C sharp, you'll see just momentarily there's some notes highlighted in yellow. That allows us to control the hand position of the player. So if I was to press this one, you'll see on the guitar up there, it moved right up there to around about the 8th fret or so. So what I'm going to demonstrate to you here is I'm just going to put it down to the lowest fret there. I'm just going to play this E note here. Now that's being played on an open string. In other words, the guitarist wouldn't have to press any fret down to get that noise. But we can also play that E note in different positions. The same E, but if I change the hand position, sorry, I'll try again. Change the hand position up to here, play that E again. Now you probably won't have noticed, but because it's being played on a different string, it's got a slightly different tone to it. So that could be played in a few different positions. It's being played on a different string each time. So that's one way that we get natural variations in the sound of the same note across the instrument. Very, very different to something like a piano in that way. Now, another thing to be aware of is not just the different tone of guitar in different positions, but the different abilities of being able to play things. What I'm going to demonstrate here is this little combination of a D and an E being played together. So there's only two semitones, a tone between them. And you hear they sustain together. We might use it in an arpeggio such as this. Yeah, seems a bit weird to play that tone together, but it can be done. And they can be sustained together. However, if we were playing in, say, the 5th fret here, and we play that D, and I hold it down on the keyboard and then play the E, you notice they don't sustain together. And that's because Ample Sound are really clever about this. They understand that that can't be done by a guitarist playing at the 5th fret there, because that D and that E are now being played on the same string. And obviously you can't sustain two notes on the same string. So it's that really little, those clever bits of attention to detail from Ample Sound, which I think really adds to the authenticity of the sound, because you can't just do whatever you want just by playing samples on keys. There's a little bit of intelligence going on there. So that's the main sort of playing abilities. Up the top here, these key switches don't so much change the sound as we have things like sound effects. So I'll just... And they're really, really important when you're putting together a piece of music to make it sound kind of authentic, and so also add some expression in there as well. And there's some other key switches right at the top here which kind of just change some of the playing modes. I'll get onto that a little bit later. Then moving on, the main controls we see here, we've got sort of mixer controls here, so we can mix the DI sound, the stereo sound, etc. We have a pan control you expect to see here. One interesting feature that they have on all of their guitars, including this one, is the doubling feature. Now, What we normally do with guitars, what we often do, I should say, with guitars, is we'll double track them. We'll record one guitar for the left speaker, one guitar for the right speaker, and it gives it a really wide sound. That's a really common technique. And what they've done is, rather than you having to do that, they've made it possible just by switching that feature on here. So I'll just play you a couple of notes without that on. And I'll turn it on. Now, if you've got headphones on especially, you'll start to hear a difference there. And then if I turn the sort of width of that up, sorry, it starts to get really, really wide, okay? Now, you may want that sound, you may not. You may want a more sort of just an authentic, grungy sounding guitar, not too overproduced, in which case you probably wouldn't use that feature. Now, the other feature that we've got here is the capo or capo, depending which part of the world you come from as to how you say that. That basically, you want to think of that as a transpose feature. It means that if you were to play the same notes, play that G and that D together, and then as I move the capo up, even though I'm playing a G and a D, different notes come out. So it's basically transposing. But in terms of a guitarist, we think of it as a capo or a capo to transpose. Okay, so that's a nice feature to have there. And then we have a little mixer to control the level of those sound effects and things that we were listening to just a moment ago. So that's the core features on the main interface of this guitar. Next, I'm going to look at something which, again, has a really dramatic effect on the sound of the guitar, and that is the amp sim. So one of the main things that you can use to change the sound of an electric guitar is the amplification that it runs through. So there is an amp sim section on all electric guitars from Amp-Sound now, and I'll go to it here, and you'll see that you start off by selecting an amp head. Now this is probably based, I think, upon a Marshall head, and then we've got a few others to look at here. I'll just quickly cycle through them. A couple more which are related to sort of more of a heavy rock sound, and then you've got some more tame ones here, like this Tweed and the Fender amp there. So you can get lots and lots of different tones. And just to demonstrate the variation in tone that you can get just from changing the head itself without changing the actual controls on the head, I'm just going to play the beginning of that demo again, just loop around that guitar part, and I'm just going to flick through those heads so you can see what a massive difference it makes to the sound. There we are, back to the original head there. So just an incredible range of different sounds there. And as I say, you've got controls on each of those amps as well. Then we go over to the cabinet section, which I'll look at here. So we're starting off by what looks like a sort of a Marshall stack cabinet there. I'm not sure absolutely, or don't want to say, but we have another selection of cabinets to choose from, which you can see here. So again, I'm just going to play that through, and we'll go through some of those different cabinets while I play it. So yeah, obviously a massive array of different sounds there. Then we have some different miking options. Now we have one of these microphones switched off at the moment, so you would unmute it to have both of them. And there's some pretty sort of famous microphones being used there. To, you could switch to SM57 there, or perhaps let's see, a 414, a C414 there, or you could go over to a U87 there. So lots of different variations in mic sounds. And that does make, again, a difference to the sound. Let's just run through again, and I'll flick around from one mic to another. Nice dark sound there from that ribbon mic. So we've also got some room sound there, which I'm using in my little demo. I unmuted the room sound there, and then a bit of a mixer control there, so you can mix the DI, the room, the different microphones, change the cabinets, etc. So lots of variation in sound there just from this sort of amp sim section on all of the Amplsound plugins here, but it's made to really good use here. So as if you didn't have enough ability already to change the sound, you also get these kind of studio effects along with this as well. And this is common across all of the Amplsound range since version 3 again as well. You get this compressor, which is really straightforward and simple to use. You just set your threshold here by dragging this node around. You can just change the ratio by dragging this node around, and then you've got your attack and release controls over here. Really straightforward and simple to use. You then have an EQ as well, so you can then again drag around these nodes, make some different changes there to get your sound from the EQ. Then also this, they call it an echo. I think of it more as a delay, a really nice stereo delay with some nice easy controls there to shape the sound of your delay. And then we finish off here with a reverb, a really nice sounding reverb in fact. So lots and lots of controls there over the sound. Now the last thing I want to talk about is the different playing modes. So before I talk about the different playing modes, I have a confession to make, and that's I don't actually use these modes very much in my workflow. When I use Amplsound products, I have a very rudimentary approach. I just play on my MIDI keyboard and then I tidy up afterwards in the piano roll. But I know lots of people do make great use of these particular features. So there's nothing wrong with these features. Just because I don't use them doesn't mean you shouldn't use them. And as I say, I've seen lots of people use them and they get really great results. So I just want to make you aware of them, even though I'm not much of an expert on them, to be honest. But first of all, let's have a look at the strumming mode here. This is a place where you can set up different strumming patterns, and it's going to be probably a bit easier than doing it my way on the actual piano roll on your DAW. And you can put together some fairly complex and natural sounding strumming patterns. Here you can see the pattern represented here in different steps. And you can see that each step has a different kind of note here, but they're not different notes, they're different articulations. There's a mixture here. If we hover over here, you can see that's a down bass stroke. This one here is a down treble stroke, so we're playing in different parts of the guitar. So you've got lots of different ways of playing a strum, if you like. There's muted ones there, etc. And then you simply place those different articulations on the different beats of the bar that you're playing. Then over this side, we've got the different chords. Now you actually tend to play the chords on your MIDI keyboard itself, but you can set up just one note to play a chord. That makes it really easy to change. So you'd set up all your chords for whatever key you're playing in here. And what I really like about this is the way that you can change the voicing. You can see the voicing represented on the guitar neck here. So if we were to play that, it sounds like this. And that's what I would call an open C chord as a guitarist. If I was playing rock like an SG, I would normally play on SG, I'm more likely to be playing power chords. So I'm going to change that actually to a power chord, a C power chord. I'll get rid of that note there just by going like that. This is much more common. Just as a side note, when you are playing for rock and you're playing a rhythm part, they're often using power chords, meaning you'll be playing the root note of the chord, the fifth, and then often the root again. Sometimes just the root and the fifth. We don't often include the third. It can sound a little strange, the third, when it's through a distorted amp. I'm not saying you shouldn't use it, but it has a sort of a discordant, almost a discordant sound to it, even though it isn't a discord. But anyway, I digress. Let's have a listen to this with the power chord. Okay, so that's more of a typical chord that we would be using in rock. But you can set up whatever voicing you want to use for the particular piece of music that you're using. So that's a very quick overview of the strumming mode. Then we go over here to the riffer. Now the riffer is something I really should learn about. It's very interesting indeed, because you may find that if you're using your normal piano roll in your DAW, it doesn't quite make sense with a guitar part. This probably makes much more sense if you're a guitarist. starting to use guitar sounds in a DAW, or virtual guitar sounds, I should say. Essentially, it's a very similar approach to a piano roll in that each line here, rather than representing different notes, represents a different string on the guitar. And you would simply place a note in there, set up which note you're playing, set up the length of the note, and then you can go through and set up what type of note it is, etc. up here. And then you're also on these are not other strings, but places where, for example, you can play effects and things. So that's a sort of very quick overview of the Riffer. But yeah, really, really interesting way of doing things. And this one is set up to play this song by AC/DC, which I'm not going to play for you now because I'd have all kinds of copyright problems if I do that on YouTube. But a really interesting approach. And again, I know several people that make lots of use of this. It's quite a sophisticated little tool, definitely worth taking a look at. And then lastly, with these different playing modes is the tab mode. And here you can import certain types of tab and then just have that played there, and you can have it sync up with your DAW and it'll play along with whatever you're doing. So that's a much more straightforward tool if you either create that tab or you get hold of that tab from other places. So that is the different playing modes with this Vintage Cherry plugin. So now for the part of the video that you've all been waiting for. How do you get your hands on one of the 3 full licenses I have to give away? Well, it's been brought to my attention that some people are freeloaders and just skip forward to this part of the video without watching the rest. But what if I was to tell you that you had to watch the rest of the video in order to get important clues to enter this draw? Well, if I did tell you that, I'd be lying, because you don't need to do that at all. In fact, all you need to do is leave a comment down below and tell me how you would use this plugin. Are you going to use it for an original song, or perhaps you're going to use it for a cover? If so, which cover are you going to use it on? Just let me know in the comments down below and you'll automatically be entered into this draw. Now, I'll be picking 3 winners in 2 weeks' time, and I'll be releasing another video to announce the winners' names. So it's in your interest to make sure you subscribe and ring the bell on YouTube so that you're notified about my future videos, including that one. Now, if you did like this video, make sure you hit the like button. I really like it when you do that. And if you didn't like this video for any reason, make sure you hit the dislike button twice. And I will see you in the next video.